especially excited tonight as we kick off our Distinguished Speaker Series. It's been a little over a year since we last had this, and we're starting up again, and we'll be having it every first Wednesday of the month. I know that's not what it is today, but Snowquester kind of screwed us up. But I'm especially excited today because of the speaker we have. 3 years ago, I started this organization, and we had our first candidate training workshop, and I was trying to get anybody who possibly was willing to drive up to New Jersey to show up and teach veterans how to run for office. And at one point, one of my friends gave me a call, and she said, "Seth, like, everybody on here is a man. There are no women in your entire lineup." And I said, "I know. I'm just getting anybody I can. Do you know any women who run campaigns who could do this sort of thing?" She said, "What about Tammy Duckworth?" And I said, "Sure. Why don't we just invite Barack Obama too? Like, maybe we can get everybody here." And I was thinking that would be the dream person to have at this workshop. And so finally, 3 years later tonight, we have Tammy Duckworth speaking to you all. So I'm really excited to have her here. Big hand for her, first of all. Congresswoman Duckworth not only is a fellow veteran, she's also a fellow colonial. She did Army ROTC while she was studying for her Master's in International Affairs here at GW. She was one of the first women to fly combat missions, and she was wounded in action in 2004. And like so many of her fellow veterans, she didn't let that stop her. She went out and kept serving in a different way. She ran for congressperson in 2006, lost a squeaker of a race by less than 3%. And then she became the director of Illinois' VA. After that, she became the Assistant Secretary for Public International Intergovernmental Relations at the National VA, and ran again in 2012, where she beat a sitting congressman by over 9%. There are certain members of Congress who just happen to have served in the military at some point, and there are fellow veterans who happen to be serving in Congress. And Congresswoman Duckworth is definitely the latter of those two. So I'm deeply honored to have her here tonight. I also want to point out that she just accepted, or just sent back a portion of her salary because of these furloughs that are going on. And we have 2 Second Service Fellows here tonight who have both been experiencing that, are both working for the government right now, and are both, being furloughed partially because of that. And so it's greatly appreciated. So without any further ado, let me welcome Congresswoman Duckworth.
Thank you, Seth. Well, it's great to be here back at GW, especially on behalf of the Center for Second Service. I have so many great memories of my time here at the Elliott School. And in fact, it was GW that really opened my eyes to a diverse group of people. And those people changed my life. I came here thinking that I was going to join the Foreign Service. It's in fact why I chose GW, because when I graduated from the University of Hawaii in 1989, GW had the highest pass rate for the Foreign Service exam in the entire nation. And so I came here hoping to get my master's and then work towards that. But at the time, I started realizing that the men and women and fellow students in the classes that I was taking, and the ones whose opinions mattered the most to me, the ones I got along with, were all vets. They were either vets or they were currently serving military who had been sent to GW to get their master's, or they were members of the Guard and Reserve. And at the time, you have to remember, this is 89, 90, 91. The Berlin Wall was coming down. We didn't know what was going to happen with the arms in the former Soviet Union, what was going to happen. And I had these amazing classmates here that I would never have been exposed to had I remained in school in Hawaii. And they started encouraging me to take some classes to learn about the military. I said, well, why do I need to know that? They're like, if you're going to join the Foreign Service and represent the United States, you need to know what the difference is between a brigade and a platoon, and you need to understand the military's mission. And because military force and military power is an aspect of the United States' power in the world, and you need to understand that. And because of them, I took some ROTC classes, and I ended up in the Army because at the time, GW had Navy ROTC, but they would not accept a graduate student into the ROTC program. And my dad was a Marine, so I thought I'd go that route. And so I checked out a bunch of, Marine Corps, I checked out Navy, I checked out Air Force, the Army having no standards. Said, sure, we'll take a grad student. Everybody else said, no, you have to be an undergrad. And the Army's like, yeah, sure, come on. So I started ROTC the second year of my master's, and I was commissioned in the first year of my PhD program. And it all started right here because of the people that I met who really inspired me to do something more and to learn more. You know, I was excited to learn that a lot of the folks here today, and I just met many of them, are veterans who are looking to serve again in politics, government, or some type of public service. And I want you to know that, you know, while my transition in that experience has not been easy, it's been incredibly rewarding. One minute I was flying my Black Hawk in Iraq, loving my mission, I was a battle captain. I was loving everything about what I was doing. I was with my men, I was flying the aircraft, you know. And the next minute, I woke up in a hospital bed and I couldn't move any part of my body. And I thought, what's happened to my life? Where am I going to go? And I only knew one thing. I wanted to keep serving, and I wanted to go back to my unit, and I wanted to be with my guys again. That didn't work out. I am still serving, though. But I found a different way to serve, and I found a different way to make a difference, and I found a different path. And I'm not saying that the path towards politics is right for everyone, but I think for those of us who understand what it means to serve this nation, whether in uniform or in some other capacity, once you have that drive in your gut, you just want to continue to do something. And there are people here who may never have served, but who volunteered at your PTA, who volunteered at your soup kitchen, who do something because you value this nation and you value what it means to be an American. And you understand that we all have to give something back. So after I was wounded, I was at Walter Reed in 2005, spent 2005 in the hospital. And we were having a lot of issues. And I was the highest ranking amputee there at the time. And we started coming across young service members who were having problems. And by this point, I had met Senator Obama and Senator Durbin, the two senators from Illinois. And Senator Obama was on the Veterans Affairs Committee. Even though he was a freshman, nobody knew who he was. He had no military background. He ended up on Veterans Affairs. And they made the mistake of giving me their business cards with their personal numbers on them. Because I must have looked like, you know, weak and wounded and not probably like, you know, docile at the time. I don't know. But I started calling and I said, you know, I've got a soldier here who's unconscious. He's been in a coma for 2 months. The Army accidentally paid him hostile fire pay while he was in the hospital for the last 6 months. And now they're taking it all back, and his wife, who's 19 years old, has no money. And she can't make the mortgage on the trailer that they have at Fort Hood. We got to do something. And it was after that, and then I met Bob Dole. And Senator Dole would come through Walter Reed, and he would sit on the therapy tables where you were doing push-ups or sit-ups or just learning to just roll over. And it wasn't Senator Dole, and a lot of the young guys and gals there did not know who this man was. To us and to them, he was just Lieutenant Dole. He was Lieutenant Dole sitting there talking about how the only reason he got out of Italy and the firefight that he was in was because his sergeant pulled him out and dragged him to safety and saved his life, and how his life since that time has been spent trying to live up to what his NCO did to save his life on that battlefield. And we got it. It didn't matter that he was 60 years older than most of us. It didn't matter that we fought in 2 different wars in 2 different continents. What mattered was so many of us, me included, were carried to safety by our NCOs, by our buddies, and we got that. And so I'm here to really support the Center for Second Service because I want you guys to run for office. I want you to be involved in government because we need that shared place, that shared experience to reach across the divide, the gulf that we see that's happening in Washington now with the partisanship and the bickering and the just nastiness that is happening. And I was asked inside earlier, so are you saying because you get along with some of the Republicans who are veterans that there's really not partisanship? Oh, heck no. There is partisanship in the Congress. And there is a lot of bickering, and there's a lot of days where, I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall. But even on those days, I can reach out to someone, and if they express a true dedication to this nation and to the great ideal of what America is, I can find a place to speak with them and to talk to them. And I think about, the people who came before us. I think about people who can work together even when you don't always agree philosophically. I talked about Bob Dole. I mean, think about Senator Dole and Senator Daniel Inouye. Two warriors, both wounded in World War II, who recovered in the same hospital, and who then went on home to their own separate states and ran for office and ended up United States senators. And even though one was a Democrat and one was a Republican, they co-sponsored the American with Disabilities Act. Had nothing to do with the military or veterans issues, and yet they worked hard to pass the Americans with Disabilities Act. And because of that work that they put into that legislation, I'm able to live the life I live today with my disability. And had it not been for them and all of the great fighters, Steny Hoyer was another one who really pushed through the ADA. Had it not been for those folks finding common ground from which to work, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't live in this great nation. So I think about them. I decided to run in 2010 because I really feel like we need to work together. The gentleman that I replaced was actually bragging about shutting down government, bragging about getting nothing done. And that was so different from who I was at the core of my being and at the core of what the military had taught me to do. My entire adult life had been spent trying to get things done. That's what you do in the military. Here's the mission, you figure out a way to get the mission accomplished. Your mission is never to just shut down and do nothing. There's always something that you can do. And so, I think that we have a lot of work in front of us, and fixing the economy, balancing the budget, immigration reform, reducing gun violence, and so many issues where common sense is so badly needed so that we can get to the needed reforms. I think what we really need is a change in perspective, and that perspective can be reached, especially if we get veterans, military families, and folks involved in politics. We need to move away from politics being a bad word, to being something like you want to become a politician, why would you want to do that, to an honorable thing, which is what it has been in the past. I get asked the question, all the time, what motivates you? Why did you decide to run? Why are you doing this? And for me, it started off with being in that hospital. And I had an obligation to the troops who were younger than me, who were lower ranking than me, to represent them within the hospital. And it wasn't just me, it was all of us. If I saw a young specialist and he was giving his mom a hard time or not doing his therapy, I'd go find another amputee who was an NCO and say, hey, you need to go do some NCO business with that kid and kick his ass because he's not showing up for therapy. And they would go do it, and and so that military structure remained. And it was good for the soldier. It was also good for me because it gave me something of my identity that I could hang on to even as I was recovering. But at the end of the day, I think my motivation, before I talk about my motivation, I want to talk about your motivation. Each one of you is here today because you believe in something, because you want to learn more about what it means to serve a little bit more, or different opportunities to serve. And I think about all the people who get up every day and who go to work, whether it's firefighters or police officers or public servants or teachers, all these people who get up every day and go to work, and what motivates them to do the job that they do, especially if you are a civil servant, if you are serving our nation, our communities in some way. And yes, it's a job, it's a paycheck, but there's a lot of days when you don't want to get out of bed and you just don't want to go. But you go anyway because you believe in something a little bit more important, whether it's education, whether it is transmitting ideals, you show up anyway. for me, what gets me out of bed on the days when I don't want to go to work are the guys on my crew. You know, Chief Warrant Officer Dan Milberg, who saved my life in Iraq, who landed the aircraft, who evacuated everyone, who then came back to recover my body because everybody thought that I was dead. I never received a tourniquet, I never got first aid. They thought I was dead. They came back for my body just so my mom would have something to bury. And he carried me out of that field and he said, you know, I would have nightmares every day, and I would never have been able to deal with what that was like getting you out of that field because my right arm was almost severed, so he really had no limbs with which to carry me. He had one arm to try to carry me out of the field, and he said it was like the opening scenes to Saving Private Ryan. And he said he dropped me, he was covered in my blood and my tissue, he fell on me, he fell, my body fell on him, and he said in those few minutes trying to get me out of that field to the rescue bird, it felt like his heart was going to explode. He was working so hard to get me out of there. But he's okay. And he's okay because I'm doing okay. And he's okay because I've managed to go on to work for vets. And he's okay because I'm doing the job that I'm doing in Congress. And because of that, you know, he gets up and he goes to work and he's able to deal with the experiences that he had. That's what motivates me, because I should have died in that field. Thank you. I didn't get myself out of there. These amazing men got me out of there. And these amazing men are who I answer to. And I don't ever want to pick up the phone and talk to Dan Milberg and have him be ashamed of a decision that I had made, of a vote that I had cast, of a comment that I had made. And I think that keeps me honest. And that keeps me working in Congress and trying to be someone who's bipartisan, to work across the aisle. Because, well, Dan is pretty conservative and has told me himself that he will run for Congress someday. He's from Missouri. And he said that he will run for office someday, probably state legislature. And he goes, but you probably won't like it because I'm pretty conservative. I'm like, Dan, I don't care if you run as, Green Party, Tea Party, Republican, Democrat, whatever you're going to do. If you don't think me showing up will hurt you, I will show up and campaign for you. Because nobody knows better than I who you are and what you are fully capable of when the chips are truly down. And so that's my motivation. And I think our vets get that. Our vets get that because they've been in that field in their own way, and they have the buddies that they have to answer to. And your buddies keep you honest, because your buddy's the first one. It doesn't matter how big you are, they're the first one to pick up the phone and call you and say, what dumbass thing did you just do? And they will kick your butt every single time. And that's what my buddies would do for me, and they keep me honest and they keep me going. I'm just going to wrap up by saying that all across the world right now, there are amazing young men and women who defend this nation, who serve this nation, whether it is in the military or, as we've seen in the last several days, in the Foreign Service, on humanitarian missions, as part of not-for-profit communities, as part of educational programs around the world, bringing to the world what is best and brightest about America, the ideals that we represent, equal opportunity and education, and the availability of those steps into the American dream, that you can do all of these. And these amazing young men and women are doing this around the world right now. So I ask that you keep them in your prayers, that they are safe, and then for our troops who are in harm's way and our troops who are in military and VA hospitals, God bless them. And I hope that we continue to live up to what they've given for this nation. And so with that, I'd love to take questions.
I'll come up and try to facilitate.
If you would, that would be great.
Who was the first question?
It's got to be so. It's not a shot crowd.
Oh, all the way in the back.
All the way in the back. Is that Karina? Terrific.
was actually challenged to put my money where my mouth was. I was complaining to Senator Durbin and Senator Obama so much about how crappy the troops were being treated and how they weren't getting the right services. And finally, Senator Obama started calling me to testify before the Veterans Affairs Committee. And about 9-10 months after I was wounded, I get a call from Senator Durbin who said, Tammy, if you feel this strongly that the nation is not doing right by veterans, then run for office. Do something about it. Be that voice. And so it was really the mentoring that I received from Senator Durbin who really pushed me to run for office. And I had never done that. See, I've been a military officer my entire career, and I took pride in being nonpartisan. I took pride, I had my own values, but I never expressed those because one of the greatest things about this nation and the American military is that the American military is subservient to the civilian. The reason that this is the greatest democracy that is out there on the face of the earth is because we will never have a military junta. It's because military leaders understand the supremacy of the civilian population and civilian leadership over the military. And so it went sort of against everything. And I knew that I was going to lose friends when I announced that I was going to run, especially when I announced I was going to run as a Democrat. But it was really funny because how many friends came forward and said, I'm a Democrat too. I know you are. But the support that I got was really bipartisan and has been very bipartisan from the veteran community. I get a lot of veterans who are like, I'm registered Republican, but I vote for you every time because it's about those common goals.
A couple more questions.
Yeah, I'd like to ask if you ever were able to register and vote from overseas, and if so, what was that like?
Yes, so I did vote from overseas. I was already registered to vote, and I did mail in a ballot, and it was really interesting because there was discussion about whether or not they were going to need to count the overseas, the mail-in ballots from the troops who were overseas. This was 2004, and I remember thinking, you better count mine. My butt is not over here in Iraq getting shot at for you to not count my vote. And so what was really interesting was November 4th, I think, 2004, or whenever election day was, November 4th or to November 6th, I watched and, you know, I tell my colleagues that the troops are watching because my entire task force was watching the election. We were at war. This was OIF-2. This was the second year of the war. We were all watching what was going to happen with the election, and we were paying attention. And I watched as you know, President Bush won, and I realized we're going to be here for a long time, and we're going to stay with this. And that was my personal opinion. I didn't say anything, and then 4 days later, I was blown up. And so for me, the election in 2004 is very much in my mind and as part of who I am, because I remember my personal disappointment in how the election turned out, and my dread at where the nation was going to go with what we were spending and what we were engaged in Iraq, and my fear of what was happening in Afghanistan, which is we weren't paying attention to Afghanistan, and then I was injured. So I did but yes, I did vote from overseas, and I was able to mail in my ballot. Hopefully, it got counted.
One more question. John.
Great question. You have to be yourself, and you have to be willing to speak up and engage in the process, and you have to be smart about it. You can't just say, you should vote for me because I'm a veteran. You have to really get into that process, and you need to have an understanding of the fundamentals of how to run a campaign. And for me, that was the biggest difference between the campaign I ran this time and the campaign I ran the last time. I didn't know anything about campaigns. I decided to run. I had the mentorship then of Senator Durbin, and I was, here's your campaign manager. Here's 3 guys. Choose one of them to be your campaign manager. You're going to need a campaign consultant. And they just told me what I needed, and we were off and running. And I will be perfectly honest, I had no real understanding of how campaigns work. And as much as I remained the focal point of that campaign, in some instances I felt like I was along for the ride. You know, you're going to show up at these events and you're going to speak and be yourself. You know, and I had my own policy positions, which were not always super popular with my own party. Because I refused, for example, I refused to say that the war in Afghanistan was incorrect or wrong. So start by getting some understanding of the fundamentals. That's why the program here at GW is so incredibly critical. If you can be part of that. And then be yourself and reach out to your community. For this last campaign, my average contribution was less than $75. For this campaign, I raised over $5 million, and I did it $75 or less. The other thing that happened in this campaign is a real indication of the power of having a wide base and a grassroots network was the fact that when my opponent, I'll give you an example, when my opponent accused me of speaking of my military service too much, and that what he basically said was that real heroes don't talk about the military service. The real heroes, you know, are very quiet about their service. And Tammy Duckworth, that's all she talks about is the military. And, you know, whatever that said, I just spent 3 years trying to get veterans to talk about their military service so they could tell them what great leaders they are, what great training they had, talk about the post-traumatic stress and the treatment so that they could get the help. In a 24-hour period, I raised over $100,000 online, and there were $5 increments. There were 5, 10, 15, 20 buck increments. So you can raise the money, you just have to be yourself. You can't come across as, you know, if you just depended on your party to get you the money, you're never gonna get there. And so that doesn't mean that I didn't spend endless, mindless, mind-numbing, soul-sucking hours in call time. I did, and I still do. And I still call people and say, hey, you know, I know you've been a great supporter. Could you please donate $50, $100, $1,000, $5,000 to my re-elect? Didn't you just get elected? I know, I just got re-elected. It's been 3 months, but could you please send me $5,000 for my campaign so that I can stay here? And I do it, not because I like calling people to ask for money. I do it because I need those resources to be here and do this job. And if that's what it takes. Until we have campaign finance reform, which I absolutely support, and we need to get money out of politics. We need to have public funded elections. This is the nature of the beast, and we have to do it. I don't know that doing what I did, which is immediately running for the United States Congress as your first race, is the advisable thing to do. But there are all sorts of races that you can run for to build your network. And if you lose your first race, that's fine. I lost my first and won on my second. Senator Durbin lost 3 races before he finally won one. Senator Obama lost for Congress, lost for a bunch of races before he finally became a state senator. And so losing is not a bad thing either. Losing gets your name out there. Losing gets you the experience. Losing gets you the network to start the next campaign. Yeah. Hi, Carol.
For those of us who are still active duty, I was wondering if you had any advice for those of us who are maybe looking into running for elected office later, things we could do in the transition years between now and the separation and retirement to kind of set us up for that in order to aid in that transition.
Great question. I don't know if the people in the back heard. The question was for those who are still active duty or actively serving, who might like to run for office down the road, what can they do now? Well, you're in a great location, but you can certainly start off very simple. You can volunteer on campaigns. You can volunteer and work in congressional offices, and that will give you an understanding, especially the campaign part is really the most important. My chief of staff right now, 7 years ago, walked into my campaign offices as a volunteer. And 7 years later, she's a chief of staff. She's one of the youngest chief of staffs on the Hill, and is crafting major policy decisions. So some volunteer work. I think that if you can hold office in some way that is not a partisan way, whether it's with the school board or committees, that is really important because you need to get that under your belt so that you're comfortable with that process. And then once you start to get out, then I seriously would think about running for office. And if you are from a state or a program that has training programs, in Illinois we have a program called I Will. It's actually run by Loretta Durbin, Senator Durbin's wife. And I Will is Illinois Women in Legislation, and it's a year-long program that takes women in all walks of life and gives them training on how to become a candidate. And this is with the understanding that they may not be ready to run for 10 years, but throughout the course of the year, it gives them training on how to be a candidate. It gives them, and they bring them to the state capitol and at different levels of government and teaches them. They bring them here to Washington, and it's a whole year-long program. And we've had several I Will graduates go on to run for office, and it's a great place. So if you have programs like that in your state, I would certainly get involved.